Now, John, I feel like you have a question for me. I feel like you have a couple of questions for me as we transition to the Dallas Oklahoma City series. That series is tied at 2. That was a bit of a surprise finish in Dallas, watching Dallas just completely lose any semblance of, offensive rhythm, and watching Shai Gilgeous-Alexander slow-mo his way to a 41 in the finale, in that towards the end of that game, and really sort of take over. I feel like you got 2 questions for me because there's 2 questions in the rundown. So I'll just let you. Well, first off, do you have any mourning to do over Game 4 before we move on?
I'm going to quote Dave Chappelle from Chappelle's Show. I think this was when he was Black Bush, which was like the last skit that actually went out before Dave quit the show. When he said, "That shit is gross." Game 4 was gross, Vinny. Like, I am an undersized, slow basketball player. You know what I value more than anything else? Free throws. They're called free throws because there's no defender there. You can take your time. Even Giannis can take all the time he needs. And the fact that they lost that game because they couldn't make more than half of their free throws should be an indictment on this team and its soul. So I'm grossed out. Absolutely grossed out by Game 4. That's not my only gripe, but it is my main gripe. But this is the question that I've had in my head since that game.
Well, 2 things before you go to your question. Before you go to your question, right? 2 things. 1, you ever shot free throws with a tight booty? It's kind of hard to get full, you know what I mean, full extension and everything else when your cheeks are tight, right? Right? Secondly, it's hard to breathe when your arms are wrapped around your neck, John.
That's kind of my point. All right, here's my question. Because I find this question and the follow-up question to be interesting. Number 1, who has been the best player in this series? In your opinion?
In this series, I believe the answer is clear. I believe it's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander.
I think if there is a clear answer, that's the clear answer. This is where things get interesting. Who has been the second best player in this series?
I actually do not believe it to be Luka Doncic. And I believe if you're asking me the question, it's because your answer is not Luka Doncic or Kyrie Irving. I believe your answer would be the same as mine, which would be PJ Washington.
I think there's only one choice for the second best player in this series, assuming Shai is the first. And I think it's PJ Washington or Chet Holmgren, who has been very, very good. So, yeah, it has not been Luka. It has not been Kyrie. If it's anyone from Dallas, it's PJ Washington. I could make an argument that Chet Holmgren has been the second most impactful player in this series.
I'm with you. Clearly, I have these different playoff rules from watching decades of playoff basketball. Like I'm some 70-year-old man and I'm not even 40 yet, right? But one of them is you jumble all the players together like playground style. You pick teams and you put the 5 best players or 6 or 7, whatever it is, and against their 6 or 7. And usually by the time you get to the 5th best player, you're going to find out, man, it's 4-1 or it's 3-2. Like one of those things. Or you look at this collection of players. And this collection of players, you will say, okay, before the series, maybe Shai is the best player. Or maybe Luka is the best player because he's actually carried the team to the Western Conference Finals. He has the playoff bona fides. Either way, those will go 1-2. And then you would go Kyrie. And then this is where it gets fun. Because you would say, maybe it's J-Dub, who I gave strong consideration on all defensive team. And then you got Chet Holmgren, who's clearly going to be an all-defensive player and a Defensive Player of the Year candidate because he ain't going to win it as long as Victor Wembanyama's in the league, right? All right, cool. That's where you're wondering, where does Daniel Gafford fit or Derek Lively fit or PJ Washington fit? And they've added an element of toughness. Derek Lively in the draft, Gafford and PJ Washington, subtle acquisitions around the trade deadline for Dallas, which really basically just added a layer of toughness and versatility to a team that needed it. But if Chet Holmgren is going to literally be the guy at the rim that stops everything, that literally says, this is not yield, This is not green. This is red. This says stop. You're not getting anything over the top of me. You're not running through me. A, the series is over. And B, we got problems a lot sooner in the Western Conference.
Vinny, he's averaging like 4 blocks a game in this series. And they're not even really going at him. Like, one of the issues Luka is having in this series is he gets in the lane, sees Chet, and is looking for passes because he's like, I don't know that I can do anything with this. And he has that man outweighed by 70 pounds,
probably
80 pounds. He has way more experience. He's got a floater game and a beautiful mid-range touch, and he is terrified of that man. And I don't know that I blame him. If Chet puts on muscle, like,
he won't.
I'm not saying he
won't.
I'm not saying he needs to get like Giannis level muscle, but like, if he does the Kevin Durant thing where he's always skinny, but at some point his core strength becomes so good that he's strong and he's got a base and you can't push him around, I don't know how you deal with him. Like, he is an absolute nightmare on both sides of the court. That's why I said, like, he might be the second best player in this series, or the second most impactful player in this series. Now, I had a question in here in the rundown of if you are nervous about picking Mavs in 7, and you just said, like, I don't know if the Mavericks win this series, which tells me you're probably getting nervous. I am still kind of confident because all those guys you just listed, Gafford, Lively, Washington, they added toughness, all that stuff. This is the best defense I've seen from the Mavericks in like 10 years. And that they did that Western Conference final run 2 years ago, and that team played very good defense. This defense is so much better than that defense. And they show up every night. And for as hurt as Luka is, like, watch Luka. He cannot run. Like, he can jog, but he cannot run. And in game 4, he played the best defense he has played in his career.
He did.
It was amazing. And so I love that they have this defense, and I trust that at some point, Luka and Kyrie's offense is going to be better than it's been. But maybe I'll just be sitting here waiting until the series is over and the Mavericks go home.
Look, Luka shooting 39% from the field. Kyrie is actually shooting 46%. It just doesn't feel like it because you don't get the Kyrie explosions.
Vinny, he scored 9 points in game 4. 9.
Well, it was tough. Here's the problem for Kyrie and Luka in this switchable NBA, right? You take whatever your matchup is. This isn't the NBA that we grew up on where sometimes you have to eat your 40. Not to compromise the rest of your defense. If a guy has sent a limo for you, you just going to eat your 40. This is not that. This is where you're going to switch and hunt and switch and hunt. But the problem with Oklahoma City is you got Lou Dort, all defense. J-Dub, future all defense. Then you got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, hands almighty, lead the league in steals. You know what I mean? Like, and maybe you can body him, maybe you can give him a shoulder, but ain't no easy win. Remember Nutty Professor? The first Nutty Professor, where Eddie Murphy, the grandmother, and Eddie Murphy, the uncle, had gotten into it, and the grandmother was like, ain't nothing but a short walk. You walk over, you're limping back. You know, that sort of thing. That's what it feels like when you're going against those dudes. You're going to limp back because ain't no easy wins. There's no easy wins. And if you by chance happen to get by one of those dudes, guess who you got standing at the rim? You got Chet at the rim. And maybe your best chance is throwing your body into him. But it doesn't look like that's a viable strategy. Like Dallas in this series so far, shooting 38 from 3. That's really respectable. But they're shooting 42 from the field. I don't know if you can win a series that way. So if you ask me, am I nervous? I tell you, John, no, I'm not nervous. Fucking terrified. Okay? Terrified, John.
Hey, wait, one last thing before we get off this series. I think the best defender on that team next year is probably Chet Holmgren. I think the second best defender on that team is not in the starting lineup yet.
Continue.
Have you watched Case and Wallace?
Yes, but I would say from the standpoint of like strength.
Yeah, he doesn't have the strength that Lou Dort has. He doesn't really have, well, I guess he kind of does have Jalen Williams' length. He's just everywhere. And his defensive instincts and his hands and his feet are so fast. If you replace Josh Giddey in the lineup with that man, I don't know how you score against that team anymore.
Well, it's funny that you say that because it's time to have a conversation about Josh Giddey. You know what I mean? Like and he tried to shoot more early, but it just didn't feel like he was in the flow of the offense. It felt like he had heard people say, Josh Giddey, what are you doing out there besides, doing aerobics? You know what I mean? Doing some cardio. But that takes them so far out of their offensive flow. They don't necessarily need him to shoot and score, but just like with Minnesota, where I mentioned early, where, maybe Jaden McDaniels will make some shots and Nickeil Alexander-Walker will make some shots. But unless you have guys that teams will respect, either as a screener or in the dunker or in the corner, it will compress the defense that much more and leave no space at all for your main ball handlers to get through. And that's why you're seeing what you're seeing defensively, because Dallas is a really good defensive team. Oklahoma City has got all the dudes that we named. This is an old school defensive struggle. This is why, once again, y'all, this is why I love the playoffs. This is why we wake up to Charmed every damn morning. All right? This is why we stand up late, watching Inside the NBA, waiting to see what Chuck is going to say and how Shaq is going to egg him on. Like, let's enjoy these moments while we still got them. All right, cool.